Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1231. Somewhere else, 32. Earth, Cerebellum. Whoa, it's so big, mother, she heard her child exclaim after she followed her partner through the natural rift in the pathworks. It was true, she had also never seen such a huge forest. All the trees towered over 50 people lengths above them, many even higher. Despite the thick blanket of leaves above, there was enough light making it through to feed the lush foliage that covered the ground and filled the gaps between their massive trunks. Tantalizing fresh air filled her lungs as she took a deep breath in joy. The information broker had not lied. It really was an elven heaven. Who would have thought that just beyond a small cave at the bottom of a crevasse, they would really find such a wonderful place? The mana in the air was so thick that she could almost smell it. Her heart quivered. After everything they went through, had they finally found their safe haven? A place where neither humans nor Degasi could harm them. Could they finally find peace and prosper in this new world? She followed her partner and the others as the pitiful rest of their tribe followed through the rip behind her. Their faces were filled with expressions of wonder and joy, just like hers. Present. She vividly remembered that day, when they thought they had found paradise. The days when they thought they had found their eternal home. The forest was abundant and grey quickly and supplied them with everything they needed. Their modest homes were built in the vast crowns of the giant forest and things were good. A sharp pain in her abdomen forced her to open her eyes. She thought she was close to death, but life denied her to sink into the sweet delusions of days gone by. Denied the solace of eternal slumber, she was forced to witness reality before her. Their beautiful homes, the home she had sung from the tree together with her partner, were smashed, burning debris at the foot of the tree. The small market square at the center of their community was in chaos. Horned people were fighting the twisted creatures that devastated the village. With staff and magic, they slew the beasts, but it was no one-sided battle. Without a sign of fear, they threw their lives away to stop these beasts. Seeing the mighty warriors battle with the lives on the lines against the bests none of them could even harm, made her feel thankful and bitter. Had they only listened, had they only known how valiant these warriors were. Leave this place, the darkness is approaching. This was a warning one of the horned people had brought them one day. Until then, they had not known that there were others living in the forest. No matter how far they traveled, they had found weird beasts, but no people. They should have heeded their warning, instead, they had dismissed the stranger's words. Although they were surrounded by the force of the woods, something almost sacred to elves, they were blinded by their newfound happiness. They didn't want to see the danger, until it was too late. Hot tears flowed down her cheeks, as she looked away from the tragedy, only to see what relentlessly tortured her. Her heart raced in shock. A tent pole from one of the stalls had skewered her stomach. The wound was not bleeding much, which felt more like a curse than a blessing as she was forced to witness the tragedy. Seeing her people and the horned ones fight desperately, the memories of the past days flooded into her mind. Everything that led up to this moment. It had not taken long for strange beasts to attack the village after the horned one warned them. Yet, rather suspected him and his people to be behind these beasts. They had misconstrued a well-meant warning. She was ashamed to see how wrong they were. "Stand up, woman, and heal yourself. We have to evacuate quickly," someone said and pulled her out of the rabble. It was not someone of her tribe, but the horned one that originally brought the warning to them. She recognized his azure blue suit of leather armor, which now looked plenty ragged. One of his horns was broken out and he had a massive bleeding hole on the top of his head. Almost in a trance, slightly comforted by his grassy smell, she followed his instructions. With a quick move and a sharp pain, she dislodged the broken pole from her abdomen and cast a healing spell with gritted teeth. It was not perfect, but she managed to stop the bleeding. After she healed herself, the horned one sprinted off, not looking whether she followed or not. Of course, she followed after him with haste. He ran out of the village. On the path, she came by her home. What used to be a beautiful little best for the three of them in the crown of the trees, had turned into a ruin, with broken pieces littering the floor at the foot of the tree. Her heart jumped when she saw a tiny hand sticking out from the debris. Could it be? For just a moment she had the delusion of hope, but she was different from the other who were frantically searching the ruins for their family. She had seen with her own eyes, how her partner and child were ripped apart when the dark griffin attacked the market square. She almost broke down then and there. What was even the point of surviving alone? Why was fate so cruel and allowed her to survive? Why had she, who did nothing and can nothing, survive? Why couldn't it be her bright sun? Feeling the guilt weighed heavily on her mind, her legs began moving on their own. She just ran. She ran and ran, even catching up to the horned one, now following right behind him. All she could do was to focus on her feet hitting the ground with vengeance as she ran from the pain. Earth, Lambda. As her people dragged their feet through the hot sands below an unforgiving sun, Delpharia couldn't help but be in awe of this world. She had never thought that a world so fraught with dangers could harbor life. Facing this seemingly never-ending desert, she almost wished to be back in the bone-chilling weather of the border storm. The thought of the freezing winds ripping at their clothes, the snow and hail, and rain that descended with enough force to kill. The beasts, abominations made of ice, flesh, and metal, no, well, not those. She tried not to think of those things. But the other thoughts helped her cope with the relentless heat that tried to cook her alive. Right after they stumbled out from the terrifying storm, happy to leave the worst part of their journey behind, they suddenly faced a path even worse. Their lack of supplies was manageable in the storm full of creatures and water. One just had to be brave enough to consume them. But here? Even if they were willing to eat sand, it just meant they would shit bricks, but did not help with survival. On the other hand, apart from the ball of fire shooting death rays at them, this was the most normal stretch of earth she experienced or heard about. No crazy magic, nor weird beasts, no catastrophes or plagues waiting to wipe them out. Just sand and very strong sunlight. In the evening, the Saintess of Kavala prayed but without answer. Her goddess had fallen silent ever since they entered the desert and couldn't help her find the way. Looking at the vast horizon of softly flowing dunes, she sighed. Would they really arrive anywhere if they kept going like that? A place other than death's doors? Chapter 1232 Debrief. For the first time in a while, all the core people of Minas Mar were assembled in a room. At this point the usual meeting room was no longer enough and the assembly was relocated to an auditorium inside of Minas March. As a mage tower, it seemed that there were also lessons held for disciples, so apart from the facilities, dorms, and guest rooms, there were also auditoriums that went mostly unused so far. Now they were all assembled here. It's great to see everyone in good health, Lena greeted everyone, once they found their seat among the many rows surrounding the rostrum. Everyone greeted her back. The mood was great, considering the frightening war they had prepared for ended in a victory without casualties on their end. I know everyone is already in party mode, but we called this meeting to talk about the most pressing matters at the moment, to decide the general direction in the future while everyone is present. The princess reiterated the reason for their meeting shortly. If everyone is ready, the first thing I would like to talk about is how we will deal with Spacia. Lena made a stylistic pause in her sentence, giving Link the time to raise his hand and call out a question. Didn't we just deal with Spacia? The gourmet hunter asked with a big naive grin on his face. Although he had been stationed in Little Sigma during the battle, he felt just as proud as the people who were actually here. That was just Nadine Durnham and a small contingent of soldiers. Spacia is far from done with us, especially since we just destroyed one of their royals and the legendary troops of another. We cost them almost 10 legends, there is no way they will ignore us after this, the princess explained patiently. She was right. Although Seth and the others had intended to teach the other side a lesson with this battle, things had actually turned out crazier than expected. None of them had much knowledge about the legendary society of the great empires. Not even Lena could have known that they would be sending 10 legends at them as if it were nothing. From their initial investigations, these were just the legends under 2 of the royals acknowledged by Spacia. They were not even sent by any of their main force. It was hard to say they taught Spacia a lesson if what they defeated were just auxiliary forces. There is also the question of what to do with the prisoners of war, especially the captured legends, she added another point to the topic. The room had fallen silent, as everyone listened to her and was thinking for themselves. Since it is very likely that they will send another force, we should start reinforcing our defenses and troops, Monique suggested like a strategist. Yes, preparation was important. Many in the room agreed, although some hesitatingly. After all, the goal for most of them was to return to Earth as ultimately peaceful society. Too much military could be a detriment on that part, however, there were no notions of fear or surrender in the room, which made Seth quite happy. Quite a few made suggestions on how to fortify Minas Mar further. Seth also agreed that they had to reinforce themselves. Not just to deal with Spacia, but also with the dangers of Earth. However, after he got a good night's sleep and gave their situation some thought, he found that this was not enough. I say, on top of strengthening ourselves, we should double down on what we already did, the bard suggested, his voice of Seth being heard in the whole room, without overpowering the existing voices. "What do you mean?" Lena asked, a little concerned about what the blacksmith meant. "Since it's already clear that Spacia isn't going to leave us alone, we should be more proactive than just preparing to defend. They are already our enemy. We should make sure it's known to the world," the bard said confidently. "We should not just aggressively publicize our victory over 2 royals in the Pathworks but also the atrocities Spacia committed here under the guise of the scene. We will declare our hostile stance towards Spacia publicly." Seth slammed his flat hand on the desk. As he spoke, he remembered the feeling he had at the start of the song during his fight with Nadina. This wasn't enough. Spacia probably couldn't care less for their reputation outside of their borders. It would hamper their advances on Earth. Thinking of what they did here, he felt a lot less apprehensive about his following suggestion. "Not just that, I think we should give them the parts of Earth they deserve." The room had fallen silent, but he could feel their questioning gazes. Spacia had no claim to Earth. What did they deserve? The endlessly growing forests of the southeast. The immortal zombies of the north. The robotic body snatchers from the unclaimed mountains. They wanted Earth? Let's give them Earth. All the creepy, crappy shit this world has brought forth. Let's gift them the presence of Earth and see how they deal with that. Let's see if they still have the time to bother us if their worlds are also overrun with bullshit. The room had fallen completely silent. Maybe he had vented a little and became too emotional. When he thought that he might have gone a little too far, a clap broke the silence in the room. They were quiet claps from soft hands, only audible because of the silence in the room. "Spoken like a true maniac, I love it," Alzalsar commented derisively with a wide grin on her face. Obviously, the spicy sorceress was always in, if it was about taking merciless revenge on someone. Surprisingly, many joined her applause by clapping, laughing, or knocking on tables in front of them. "Yeah, screw them and all this bullshit. Let's see them deal with this." James and the other Erdhands agreed with him. Whether they agreed with his sentiment, or he just hit the right tone, when he complained about the calamities of their home world, he didn't know. Wouldn't that also mean quite a lot of civilian casualties? Jane asked, concerned. If they released these terrifying and quickly spreading dangers on the world, it would be the general public suffering, not necessarily their true enemies. Seth also had those concerns at one point, but they had greatly lowered, when he thought of Spacia's deeds and plans on Earth, most recently the deployment of Hell Gates. "Then we just have to make sure to hit the right places," Jonah said with his disturbingly beautiful voice from below the mask. Of course, this was also an option to decrease the impact on uninvolved civilians. "We could bring the seeds of a hanging tree and plant them in their capitals, or sow the endless forests at some frontier. This would rob their land and give the normal people time to run." Allison gave a very rational way to use it, although her knowledge of the hanging tree was mostly based on what Seth told them. "Then someone would first have to go and get those seeds," Monique said thoughtfully. "Can't Karina synthesize some for us?" Lydia asked. Since the Dryad had been able to come up with all kinds of plants based on the guardian tree, the idea that she could also reverse engineer the seed of the hanging tree and the ever-growing forest was not unlikely. However, Karina shook her head. "Although I could make a seed to grow a version of the guardian tree that is very close to the hanging tree, it would not be the original. As for the forest, they are not related. I can't make something out of nothing. You have to get those seeds, then I might be able to do something," she explained with a shrug. "So we would need to send an expedition to the southeast," Mary mumbled to herself. "I get how you want to deal with the forest and I guess Hoskin can control the zombies, but how do you plan to deal with the worms?" Mike asked, concerned. He was the one who had dealt with the body snatchers the most. "Eidolon, do you think you could disassemble the stone gates?" Seth asked the master enchanter and spatial wizard. "Of course, given enough time," the man answered with a nod. "Then we could place some of the throughout the unclaimed mountains and allow the worms to move to greener pastures on their own," the blacksmith suggested. Like this, they kept on talking for a while about their future approach to dealing with Spacia. Chapter 1233 Debrief, 2. Naturally, the conversation developed in the direction of Delta's current situation. During the battle, several gates had opened surrounding the guardian tree. 8 stone gates, that Karina found to lead to a world of Spacia, and 7 hell gates that led to various worlds of the abyss. When it came to the question of how to enter Spacia and gather information, the attention turned to the stone gates. As it was a point on the agenda anyway, Lena transitioned to talk about the new pathways leading out and into Delta. We sent Golem scouts to get a better understanding of the land's layout on the other side, Lena said, and the videos of the scout golems appeared on the screen. It was the first time for the members of Minas Mar to see something as monumental as the world steel. The princess had dubbed it so. The video showed an 8-sided column with one of the giant gates on each face of the monument. It was a massive structure. And this massive monument of magic engineering was now swallowed by an even bigger tree that had sprouted on its top and strangled the 8 giant gates with its massive root system. Surrounded by vast grassy hills, there were no signs of human habitation, except the remnants of hastily evacuated military camp, drowned in the tree's root system. This sapling of the guardian tree was actually bigger than many of the offshoots that grew for a longer time, as it received an abundance of nutrition during growth. Typical for the tree, its vast emerald crown spanned far into every direction and the ground below was saturated with strong roots that kept it upright. The heaps of vacated armor and weapons glinting between these roots couldn't escape the blacksmith's eyes. Apparently, this was what was left of the army meant to invade Delta, together with the wave of 5 legends. It doesn't seem like there is any village or town nearby. They probably built it away at some frontier in case something went wrong. Drosy commented calmly. The old Tijam merchant and uncle of Duha was probably the most experienced of anyone in the room when it came to finding civilization in a new world. In a way, this reminded Seth of the stronghold, the bridgehead the theocracy of Chains had once built in the southeastern forests, to use as a stepping stone to invade Earth. Coincidentally, they now also had something like that, despite never actually planning to invade anyone. They are probably surveilling it from the distance, but maybe we could sneak in if we use the invisibility cloaks. Jonah suggested. They had some experience sneaking into place to wreak havoc, from the time they went against Y-City and the scene. As long as you managed to evade detection, it would not be too weird for unknown groups of people to appear at a frontier to make a name for themselves. You could try to infiltrate Spacia from there, Drosy mused. This was the reason the conversation had moved to the gates. They had been talking about how to get to Spacia. Unless they were able to reach their worlds, there was no need to talk about possible acts of preemptive war efforts. What about the Hell Gates? Misto, the Mist Demon, asked. The whole room took more or less part in the conversation and everyone now looked at him. Why would he mention the Hell Gate right now? I wanted to talk about the Hell Gates next. Although the Guardian Tree is currently plugging them up. That is no permanent solution. But why did you bring them up? Lena, still standing at her lectern, asked, surprised. Well, couldn't we try to negotiate with the demon? We could offer them the world beyond the gates, and while they are wreaking havoc over there, we could sneak in and join the refugees or whatever to enter the torts of Spacia, the demon suggested. Are you seriously saying we should try and negotiate with the Abyss? Phaenis asked in disbelief. It was clear that she thought this was a stupid idea, however. They are demons, not Spacia. The chance that they rather cooperate with us than fight us is quite good, the blacksmith interjected. Demons knew no morals, but they did anything for their motivation and interests. They just had to sell the idea to them. We would have to try and contact them. Maybe we could ask the Bard College for help. Mary suggested, but her idea only caused the few people in the know to shake their heads. That won't work. Although demons technically have all the same origin, the demons of the Abyss treat others like strangers. If anything, the chance they might see them as enemies is even higher. Misto explained to everyone. I will go, Alzalsar suddenly proposed. The Abyss is a little too dangerous to send the field teams. The worst scenario would be that they get swamped by monsters until a legend comes to strike them down. Negotiation will be a lot smoother if we are the ones with the bigger fist, the sorceress explained. You want to go there alone? Lena asked, perplexed. Sure, who else is able to go there and come back if things go awry if not me? The sorceress asked cheekily. Lena seemed unconvinced. Seth also thought that sending Alzalsar alone was a recipe for disaster. There were a few people that came into question. Misto could have accompanied her as a link between her and the demonic culture. But he wouldn't have much control over Al's actions. Love, the Bride of Death, was technically equal to a legend and she was known for her wisdom. There was a high chance she would be able to push Al in the right direction if it came to negotiations. Even if a fight broke out, she could protect herself. Someone who understands demon tongue, and can influence Alzalsar, Finn mumbled out loud. Suddenly, a cold shiver ran down his spine. It was too late, all eyes were already on him. The fairy's summary fit him like a glove. Can't you grant me at least a small break? The Tower Master asked with a sigh. They didn't have to say it out loud for him to get the hint. Even Monique and Jonah, who had looked eager to volunteer, were now looking at him in anticipation. Fine, fine, I will go with Al, but later, give me a break, he finally said. It wasn't that he gave in to their stares. The bard was actually interested in seeing the Abyss world, as it might help him grow his musical skills. It was just that he didn't feel like doing anything right now. They talked a while longer about other details but soon came to the conclusion to let that topic rest, as they could only make further decisions later on. In the meantime, Lena moved on to the next topic. Since we talked about Spacia, it's only right to talk about our relationship with Krina next, the princess of said empire said with a little depression in her voice. Krina had run off and technically sold them to Spacia. Nobody advocated for a positive stance toward Krina, to say the least. Since they ran off, they can't expect anything from us, Tekker spoke up determined. It was rare for the massive man to speak up, so it was special to see him voice such a strong opinion. Probably because he felt the most empathy for the people of Delta. As rugged and stoic as the tank may have seemed sometimes, he was a loving single father who lost his wife. He probably understood best the feelings and fears of the people during calamities like the demon invasion. I also think that cutting ties with them completely would be for the best. Let's show them what they threw away and have them squirm in regret. Even the usually calm and almost emotionless Allison voiced a quite dark opinion with a derisive smile. Many agreed with her notion. Thriving for themselves and having the disloyal dogs suffer when they see the loss they took by casting them aside. Even Seth found this idea appealing. Only the spokesperson on the rostrum, Lena, seemed a little apprehensive. Lena, would you like to say something? After all, Krina is your home, the bard asked her. It's nothing, she said hurriedly. You know, you can tell us everything. We trust you and you can trust us, Mina interjected with a warm smile. After all, she and Yule Catsfur knew the princess for quite some time longer than any of the others. It's shameless, but I hoped we could keep some diplomatic relations. I wanted to look for my brother and maybe, if we manage to get him on the throne, we can regain Krina as a strong backer, she argued embarrassed. Seth looked at her for a long moment, trying to use his knowledge gained as a bard to read her before he finally understood. In the end, Lena was worried for her family and friends back home. She was a princess of Krina and most of the people she knew and loved were there. But would Krina even be interested in diplomacy with us? They just cut us off. We are just a faction in a single world to them, aren't we? James voiced his concerns. No problem, we just have to follow Allison's plan. We will grow into a power that can't be ignored, and then we strike. Right guys, we can do that much for Lena. Seth answered convinced. Yet. Hear hear. Les doit, cheers echoed in the auditorium as everyone agreed cheerfully. Lena cried a little, so they decided to have a break and get lunch, before continuing. Chapter 1234 Distribution. After deciding to become a force to be reckoned with out of spite, the following points were of lesser urgency. Lena mentioned the lack of communication with THRES in recent weeks. Ever since Mike returned with the news of the body snatcher worms, the messages from THRES became scarce. Minas Mar had kept up closer contact with the first outpost of the reformed Muir Empire after Mike and the others had created a connection during Mike's divine quest. After all, the plan was to offer the people of Beta to move there, once the satellite city of Beta was fit for habitation again. However, the most recent messages mentioned the heightened activity of infected at the borders of Beta, but it had been radio silence for a couple of weeks. Since Minas Mar was focused on the tournament and their war preparations, they noticed THRES silence later than they should have. With Mike's push to take action against the worms and the plan to siphon the worms as weapons against Spacia, it became all the more important to reconnect with THRES and find out what was currently happening over there. Seth was not too involved in the happenings of THRES and the Unclaimed Mountains, but he knew that Tunomol was supposed to be in THRES at this time. Thinking of the demon, he not only feared for his supply of souls, but he also suspected that Tunomol, as a well-connected soul trader, might have information on the Abyss. Can't Karina just send one of her incarnations? The sapling in THRES is still fine, right? Evan suggested. As the one who had closest with Karina in recent times, this power of her was freshest on his mind. We also have a space mage and the system church. Why would I have to go? The Dryad argued back. Although she could send one, this was not instantaneous. Just like though needed to travel distance, this ability also had to travel for days through the roots of the trees, to reach so far away. Using the Space Mage or connecting to THRES via the system church was indeed quicker, however. We currently can't connect to the church in THRES. Although the priests of Minas Mar we trained can operate the connections between the tree stations with a church, it's a different story trying to connect to a different branch of the system church. Simone paused his explanation for a moment and mused. To say it in your terminology, although we use the same technology, we don't know the Wi-Fi password, the Santa impersonator joked with a small chuckle. With the church out of question, eyes turned to Eidolon Mo, the master enchanter and space wizard. The man barely reacted to the attention. He didn't look too good. Judging by the dark rings under his eyes, Seth guessed that he hadn't gotten any sleep since the battle. His eyes only tracked over the room slowly when he noticed many looking at him. Eidolon is busy working on the artifact gate above our heads. He won't be able to shuttle people to a place this far away, Lena spoke up for her overworked subordinate. It seemed like trying to take control of a legendary artifact was a heavier burden on the man than Seth expected. What if we use the churches to get to Spring City and have Eidolon teleport us from there? Mike suggested. This had been part of his previous route, although he didn't port to THRES but rode on one of the snakes of Senior White, together with a group of priestesses. Lena shook her head. We need Eidolon here, the princess insisted. Why don't you take my shuttle? The one I built last time? You can go to Spring City, or whatever, and fly from there to THRES, Alzalsar suggested a different solution. This seemed reasonable. The speed of the shuttle was quite high. It had only taken a couple days from Delta to Beta previously. If they started at TS7, it would only take hours. After a little back and forth, Mike finally got his will. He would be the one that would return to THRES, together with Archer, Misto, and the group of named golems. Eager to prove themselves, Boudica had volunteered for her guild to follow the three instead of the golems but was denied. Mike was concerned that they may be susceptible to the corruption of the body snatcher, as they had living flesh. Seth doubted that possibility, but Mike insisted that he preferred for the golems to come along. Well, I think that finished all the urgent points I wanted to talk about with everyone. With this, I thank everyone for their participation and Lena concluded the meeting. However, Seth raised his hand to stop her from ending the meeting. Seth, she asked a little surprised that the blacksmith would stop her. There is still one more urgent thing, I would like to talk about with everyone. Lena nodded and left the rostrum, while the blacksmith solemnly entered and stepped up, the attention of the auditorium on him. As you all know, the recent battle was a fully planned out, yet very hard fought for victory. Some things went wrong, but most succeeded and I wanted to thank everyone for their efforts and good work. The bard gave a short speech, thanking everyone for being part of Mina's march. But you know me, I wouldn't delay the victory celebration just to thank you. Since everyone here is qualified to get a legendary item or two, I thought we would discuss the loot and its distribution together. As a little prelude to the celebrations, so to say, he revealed his intentions with a smile. He put up a table from his inventory and brought out the thing they had looted from the battlefield. Seth began bringing out the legendary items he was able to appraise first and kept the other back. Since Al and Eidolon were here too, it was great timing to have them give some insights. This one is called Sokolov's lightning rod. The blacksmith brought out a round silver rod made from Ithilden and covered in dark engravings. He proceeded to explain the effects to everyone in the room and dibs, a pair of right arms shot in the air claiming priority on the item. The moment Seth mentioned the lightning affection, Azul, their resident lightning mage, couldn't hold back. Seth still finished his explanation without giving her any attention. So, does anyone want to dispute Azul's claim? Any suggestion who would deserve it more? The bard asked the room. It was only logical to give the lightning staff to their lightning mage, but she already had the palpitating spear, so Seth was open to suggestions. If Azul started dual-wielding the staff and the spear with her 4 arms, it would definitely have a great synergy and increase her overall power further. Although it made sense to give it to the only lightning mage among the current field team members, there might have been a promising member among the Oath Guard, so his eyes rested on Jack Felton. Felton was in charge of training the elites of the Oath Guard, so if there was someone better suited for the staff, Felton would know. But when nobody said anything and even the instructor shook his head, Seth shrugged his shoulders. Then come forward and take your price, he announced, holding up Sokolov's lightning rod for the Chimera to receive it. Azul happily came forward and received her second legendary weapon. Once she got back to her seat, Seth brought out the next one. The unbreakable shield, its name is a little uninspired but it is a good shield and actually unbreakable, Seth commented and explained the item. Apart from not breaking, the shield improved endurance and the blocking skill, a basic skill of most tanks. Since the shield was nothing overly specific, there was more interest in it by the tanky players in the room, like Tecker, James, or Beemont, who already had a legendary shield but thought of getting another as backup. Seth looked for Felton, to see whether there was someone in the Oath Guard who seemed worthy to get it, however, all other options were silenced when a massive hand was hesitatingly raised. Bulko, the friendly quarter giant, raised his hand. Although Bulko was one of the people he knew the longest in the room, the cleric only owned one potentially legendary item so far. He had given Bulko the Helmet of Chain, but it had not been registered by the system so far, many of its options were still known. Apart from the helmet, Bulko had chosen the sets of elemental armor Seth had once made to improve his understanding of armor sets. They allowed him to max out his powers as a mirror cleric. Despite Bulko choosing it that way, Seth had always felt a little bad, that he couldn't shower the healer with legendary items like the other. This was why there was no hesitation to give it to Bulko when the shy giant finally decided to raise his hand. The "Come and get your legendary shield, Bulko," the blacksmith called his forth, the moment the hand was raised. When Seth saw the massive man approach, the blacksmith had another idea. In addition to the unbreakable shield, he also took out the mace of armor destruction. Seeing the tower master bring out a mace in addition to the shield, Bulko stopped a little confused. This is the mace of armor destruction. As the name suggests, it can shave away 25% of an armor's durability and lower its defense by the same amount on strike. I think it would go well together with the shield and your innate talents, Seth explained. Not only was it not uncommon for a cleric to wield blunt melee weapons, but for Bulko, who had incredible strength as a quarter giant, it was simply the perfect choice. Thank you, Seth, Bulko said, touched. He didn't try to refuse the item and took it solemnly in addition to his new shield. Chapter 1235 Distribution, 2. Since they were already at the less inspired items, Seth continued with the unhealing scimitar. It was a shame that it was not really an impressive weapon, apart from slashing cursed wounds that didn't heal. The effect was great if you were able to deal damage, but since the damage of the weapon itself wasn't too high, it could end up being a hurdle instead of an advantage. Ultimately, it was Jack Felton who raised his hand. I suggest we give this to Isabella, Felton suggested. The tower master halted for a moment, as Felton said the name as if she was someone he had to know. It took him a second, that Isabella was the thief of Ortega's party, who had become Field Team 5, with Ortega as their leader. Me? The girl in question asked, surprised and embarrassed. Although Ortega and his party were invited to the briefing, they had stayed relatively quiet, since they were technically the new guys in the inner circle and had not often interacted with Seth or many of the others here. Since the decision for Team 5 was not too old either, they were not yet supplied with legendary items, and it seemed like the thief girl in question would have been too timid to ask herself. Seth only remembered her, because their caster, Morgana, was a candidate to receive the staff Wind of Death, and he thought about Team 5 when checked out Nadina's stuff. You recently changed your class to Desert Bandit, didn't you? That kind of saber fits new skills perfectly, the old man said naturally. She actually looked like she would deny it for a moment, but she fell silent, unable to refute the instructor's words. Well, since it seems to fit you the best, come up and take it, the blacksmith decided. Since Felton suggested it and Seth couldn't leave an official field team member without a legendary item, there was no further discussion. After she took her new scimitar, Seth continued with the distribution. This one is the Axe of Ignoramus, Seth announced and brought out the one-handed battle axe. With the martial-looking axe in hands, he explained the effects of ignorance is bliss. The effects of the skill were quite alluring, but the axe was not a very popular weapon. Duha was the only one using an axe in the room. Could I have it? I would also give back the sword and gloves. Bart popped up his hand, announcing his interest in the axe. When he talked about giving items back, he was talking of Flaming Fury and the gloves of education that originally belonged to Mike. They were part of the items stolen in Y City and reclaimed by the Chosen of Cryas later on. My original class was Axe Warrior before it was upgraded to the Cryas Warrior. I only used the sword, because I never got my hands on a better axe, the boss of a former bandit hideout said with a slightly embarrassed laugh. You could have just asked me to make one for you, Seth suggested. After all, he was always eager to make more legendary items for his people if he had the chance. Oh, no. I couldn't. I would have dared to ask for a legendary weapon. Seth could finish that sentence in his head, but he decided to not let it go by like this and interrupted Bart. Right. The past few days were quite busy. You couldn't have asked me, even if you wanted to. Anyway, come and take this axe for now. We will meet another time to give your equipment a once-over. The bard cut Bart's self-deprecating answer down. Blushing, the massive came over to take the axe with a shy thank you. After handing out the axe, Seth got to the last individual legendary item in Nadina's collection. It was the long, transparent spear, that appeared in Seth's hand. This is the Sprite Piercer, a spear made from a ghost that ignores defense, Seth announced to the room. He could see Al immediately sit up straight. It was obvious that she was interested in the technique used to make the spear. Maybe not because she wanted it herself, but definitely because of scientific curiosity. Apart from ignoring defense, the spear's stats itself were not overly impressive. If Seth had made it, it was around the mid-range of the epic tier when it came to damage numbers. However, being able to ignore the magic and physical defense of the target could easily make up for that. Before he even ended the explanation, two hands had shot into the air and their owners were battling with mean looks. There was Monique, the spear demon and chosen of Athena. She was currently the one with the highest level among normal members. The other was Phaenis, the mountain brigand and chosen of Phobos that had joined them following the evaluation. Both of them had left Earth to follow their path to legend, which meant Phaenis also had an above-average level in Mina's march. Both my classes focus on spear fighting. I will be able to make the best use of that weapon, Monique blurted before Seth could even ask either of them. Phaenis was hot on her heels, she had already prepared her argument. Maybe, but do you know how much fear I can command with a weapon that ignores defense? I would be unstoppable, and my class can deal with all weapons, Phaenis argued back. It seemed like this had built up quite a lot in the time he took to explain the spear's abilities. Although they were acting a little childish, both had a point. Seth. Suddenly both looked at him, obviously asking for him to decide. He felt like there was more he had to take into account in this decision, however. I will make this decision easier on you. Give the spear to me. I want to try replicating it. Then both of them can have one. Alzalsar crashed into the argument like a speed train and shattered it. Struggling between giving it to either one of the first two or just handing it to Al, this was not even a hard decision. Come and take the spear, Al, the blacksmith said and immediately regretted his words when he saw Al come down the stairs with a cheeky smile. I will take this weapon for now. I will come for the spear tonight, she threatened, unable to let go of the chance for a raunchy comment. With a sway of her hips, she turned back around and returned to her seat. Seth gulped hard, looking for Mina and Finn for help, but the spirits had already left the two. Mina knew the devastation of Al in bed, the sorceress took no prisoners and there was no mercy. Finn had heard the legends. Maybe Alzalsar was the true spirit piercer. Trying to ignore the terribly good time she brought upon them, Seth continued without comment. This necklace is called Sokolov's Health Stone, he said and explained the power of the accessory. Apart from the legendary effect of Sokolov's Health Stone which resembled Seth's Titan physique, its effects were mostly geared toward mages, as expected from the artifact of an Akmage that turned lich. Everyone was interested in the item, but ultimately they decided to give it to Bulko. It was best in his hands because this way the whole party could benefit from the item, as his class allowed him to share his attributes and stats with the whole party. This way the stone's bonus could have an effect on the whole party, instead of just one member. This is the last individual item, the rest of the things I got are sets, he said and brought out a pair of pure white gloves with intricate embroidery. The healing gloves, created by Ela the Arachne. After he introduced their abilities and stats, the two dedicated healers they had in the crowd raised their hands. Although Bulko and Finn were also technically healers, they didn't raise their hand. The first was a ballet maniac and rather concentrated on fighting than healing, and the other focused on using sets of armor to improve resistances. The gloves would ruin that strategy. This left only Linry and Ferdinand to compete for the gloves. Ferdinand had the Kiss of Lethe, which allowed him to wipe away aggro from monsters he gained when healing. Linry on the other hand had the Sun Bead necklace, Sivri had made, which improved her healing powers. The Priestess of the Fount already had a healing item. Theoretically, it was more fair to give them to Ferdinand, but these gloves were clearly meant for female hands, considering their design. No matter which one got the gloves, they would have to change their gear, as both were currently wearing the mage armor Seth invented. Taking another look at the gloves, I will concede here. But I want priority on the next legendary healer item that crops up, Ferdinand said after Seth shared his thoughts. The blacksmith didn't mind agreeing to that. As such, the healing gloves went to Linry and Seth could finally start distributing the sets. Chapter 1236 Settling Sets. Let's start with this one since I already have someone in mind for this set. These are the robe, the ring, and the orb of Gandalf. Putting them on the table one by one, Seth introduced the 3 items that made up some of Nadina's main gear. My suggestion would be to give the set, together with the Storm of Death, to Morgana of Team 5, the blacksmith finished after explaining the abilities of the items. Morgana had already been a candidate for the Storm of Death, but Seth was worried because of her low willpower attribute. The staff carried the presence of Furfur, a demon that should not be underestimated. Without proper willpower and mental strength, it was hard not to be corrupted by such power. The problem was that it seemed like a waste to gear her full equipment toward willpower, just to carry the staff, when it wasn't her main or necessarily secondary attribute as a mage. The powers of the Gandalf set could fix that, as it not only came with a good boost to willpower but also the legendary effect of Never Lost Hope. Like the Blessing of Lethe, it protected against mental ailments as well as raising willpower. It countered exactly what the bard was worried about. Seth shared his thoughts with the assembled members, but the resistance was not as strong as he would have expected. In fact, there was none at all. Although some seemed to think about the set, many casters in Minas Mar already owned lunacy sets or tailor-made items by Nico Booz, and they were not willing to give them up for the legendary set, despite the resurrection effect. "Thank you," Morgana said meekly, slightly overwhelmed as she took her new equipment. Morgana returned to her seat with 4 new legendary items and a slight skip in her gait. Suddenly she had become one of the members with the most legendary items, but nobody was jealous of her. "This is an individual item, that also belonged to Gandalf, but is not part of the set, Gandalf's Tome." Seth introduced the last item of Gandalf. The tome that gave strong buffs on magic and mana and allowed the use of one of Gandalf's spells once per day was a lot more popular than the set. It spawned a heated debate with almost every eligible mage, except Morgana, taking part. Despite focusing on alchemy lately, it was Allison who outmaneuvered the others with unexpected eloquence in the debate and claimed the tome for herself. Albeit, Seth suspected that she wasn't after the book for the item effects, but the knowledge within. Thanks to her title, she gained power simply by gathering knowledge. The higher the quality of the knowledge, she would probably even have fun, trying to decode the text of the book. Seth lost interest in trying to read it the moment he looked at the pages and realized they were encoded in some way, since even Universal Translation Leave Max couldn't make sense of the gibberish. The alchemist came to the front. Her usual expressionless, tired face didn't betray whether she was actually happy to get the tome, but her quick steps and the way she snatched it from his hands made it obvious that she was excited. The next set would be Ila's set. Like the healing gloves, it was made by the Arachne master tailor. Seth introduced the set of Google gloves and shirt one by one to the crowd, explaining their effects. Apart from the gaudy hat, this was technically a set for a thief-type class, taking into account the high boosts to dexterity, agility, lowered presence, and ability of 3-dimensional movement along any surface. There were 2 people Seth had in mind that could profit from this set the most, and there were 3 hands that rose in the air, one a little hesitant. One of the people Seth had in mind was Mina, but his girlfriend had not tried to claim the legendary set. Of the 3 people raising their hands, Seth had only expected Archer, since he thought that it fit very well with his sniper-style class as a chosen of Tatel. The other 2 were Misto and the archer from Ortega's party, who had raised her hand hesitatingly. The 3 looked at each other. Archer sighed and lowered his hand. "I already have my legendary equipment, I will survive without this set," he conceded the set to the newbie in the field teams. It was a shame, Seth would have wanted to see Archer wear the funny hat. Misto had also lowered his hand at the same time as Archer, but he stayed silent about his reasons. "I guess this set goes to you, Kaldar," Seth announced, almost not remembering the man's name. Well, seeing this guy in a snow-white Google blouse and gloves was also a sight to behold. But as the old saying goes, stats over looks. Right? Although Seth found the look quite funny, Kaldar owned it as he happily strutted back to his seat beside Ortega and the rest of his group. With Gandalf and Ila out of the way, that only left a single set to be handed out. The staff of the necrotic ruler, the circlet of the necrotic ruler, and the ring of the necrotic ruler were carefully placed on the table as Seth explained their powers. Although each item was on the level of a relic, none of them was legendary. It was their set effect that was legendary. These 3 items were a set used by the necrotic ruler. Together they have the cost to raise, control, and upkeep giant and legendary undead while lowering the cost of any other undead by 80%, but the effects are halved for the living. Seth could actually see Evie stare at the items with big puppy eyes. If it wasn't for her death set even killing her in her undead state, if incomplete, she could have used this as a secondary set when she resurrected as an undead. Unfortunately, Evie was the only necromancer who wanted the set. Looking at Al, who was a lich for almost 2 centuries, she signaled that she had no interest in this set. Next, the bard looked for Jack Felton, to see whether they had any promising candidate among the Oath Guard, but the man waved his hand signaling no interest. Seth could have figured as much. There weren't many mages in the Oath Guard, since they only recently were able to offer fabric sets for casters, thanks to Nico, Natal, and Natal's apprentices. Not many mages wanted to join, even if the Oath armor was great, even individualized it was not the best for casters. Seth's mage armors were something reserved for the field teams. This led to very few mages joining the Oath Guard, especially since the duties of the Oath Guard were nothing that helped them raise their skills for many of them. So there were few mages and necromancer was a very rare class among them. Not just because there were few who even got the opportunity, but because very few chose to take it. Who wanted to deal with rotting corpses all day long, when they had better alternatives? No wonder there wasn't a second one among the members of Mina's March. The blacksmith could only let out a sigh. I guess we will have to put these on a back burner until we raise another necromancer, he said a little disappointed. Or we sell them, Al suggested out of nowhere. She sounded absolutely serious. The spicy sorceress wanted to sell the stuff that couldn't be bought no matter the money. She wanted to sell away items that could be counted as royal treasures. She was absolutely right. Not the worst idea, the bard mumbled. Right, these legendary items were of immeasurable value for others. Seth was able to pump out legendary items regularly and they were definitely better than the set, even if their effect was not as unique. Something in high demand that money couldn't buy, but he was able to sell just that. Just how much would they be able to extort out of potential buyers? And you even have a quasi-ala that is really unto all things undead. Mary didn't fail to mention. Yes, Arjit Noor would be even more interested in this set. This needed some more thought, but Seth couldn't help but imagine what he could get out of them. If he could exchange the 3 items for wagons of epic irons or silver ore, it was like he got the license to print money. Or legendary items in this case. But couldn't you also try taking them apart? Whedon asked curious. Chapter 1237 Good idea. At the dwarf's innocent question, Seth's eyebrows rose up high. He gave the set of the necrotic ruler another once-over. His path of a legendary forger was able to copy legendary effects under specific circumstances, such as when he took apart the item. If he was honest, his path to legends had been pushed to the back of his mind over the past weeks and it was not his first thought. Especially when it was about a set of 3 items, that could help one of his friends or subordinates a lot. Seeing the situation now, Whedon's call was correct. Nobody in Minas Mar needed this set, except Evie, who couldn't use it because of her established gear. If he took the set of the necrotic ruler apart and managed to learn the legendary set effect, he might have been able to create an item or set not just Evie could sue, but also any other necromancer that may join them in the future. Or any necromancer that had enough money to buy or exchange for it, but there was a lot to do at the moment and this was far from his top priority. Thank you for the reminder, Whedon. If the others have nothing against it, I would try that in the future, he said, looking into the room. Nobody showed any signs of disapproval. Since selling was already an option they considering, using it to strengthen the blacksmith was easily accepted. Well, let's set aside this matter for now, Seth said, seeing everyone silently agreeing. There were a handful of other items, that needed the collected minds of the people present here. There were the 2 small devices Seth couldn't appraise, the ledger of administration, the sigil of royalty, and the traversal key. He places all of them on the table. He excluded the travel keg, the others didn't need to know about that one. Seth also put out all the relic-rated rings and items Nadina and Piotr had on them, in case someone was interested, otherwise they would be put in Minas Mar's guild vault, so members could exchange them. He had not seen the sorceress move, but at some point in the seconds since he put down the items, she had appeared at the desk, already holding up one of the devices. It was a smooth dark silver thing the size and shape of a remote control. As Alzalsar turned it in her hand, magical circles and runes began appearing on its surface, expanding, multiplying, and flying in the air around it, taking the shape of a bubble. Everyone's eyes were glued on the spectacle for the second it was happening before the light show receded back into the little remote. Al, do you know what that is? The bard who stayed silent while the great sorceress was inspecting the new gadget, asked carefully after the magic was gone again. Al looked at the remote for a moment longer before she placed it back on the table. It's a trap device, the legend revealed. When triggered, it will create a temporal bubble around the target, freezing them in time until either the power runs out or the device is deactivated from the outside, the sorceress with experience when it came to cruel traps explained. A stasis trap. Eidolon and Lena blurted out at the same time. It seemed like Al's explanation was enough for them to recognize what it was. So you know what this is? Seth asked seriously, in reaction to their concerned voices. Yes, but you are saying Nadina had this in her inventory? Eidolon asked, slightly upset. A lot of thoughts seemed to shoot through the enchanter's mind at this moment. Seth simply nodded, waiting for either of the two to explain what was going on. Before saying anything, Eidolon also approached the table to look at the two unidentified devices. While Alzalsar had to analyze the one she picked up, it seemed that the space mage recognized them once he saw them up close. Truly, a stasis trap and dark chamber trap. I hoped I was wrong, Eidolon said with a sigh. So it's true? Lena asked him concerned. Seth looked at the two and smacked his lips. Look here you two, you played this pronoun game long enough. Explain what this is about, the Tower Master prompted them to explain the reason they made such a big thing of this. The old man and the princess shared a glance before Lena nodded. Both of these are top secret items from Krina and Spacia. The stasis trap is a blueprint held and controlled by the imperial family, and the same is true for the dark chamber in Spacia. These are only owned or given out directly by royals. It implies that Nadina does not just have a high standing in Spacia, but also had support from a royal of Krina. Well, the imperial seal he got from Nadina's inventory already explained the dark chamber. But why was she so serious about the connection with Krina? So? What exactly changed? We already knew that someone in Krina was working with Spacia and orchestrated the whole shit show in Delta. Whoever is behind this snake oiler of misfortune, or whatever his moniker was, right? The blacksmith asked, confused about their reaction. How did this revelation make their situation any more grave than it was before? The peddler of ruin moves for many reasons, but this item means that his current backer and the one behind the situation in Delta is someone in the direct line for the throne. The biggest problem is that we don't know their intention in handing this kind of item to someone from Spacia. Why did she have those two items on her, and what was their intended use? The princess brought up her worries. Well, didn't they obviously try to capture someone? Al gave the obvious conclusion. A time trap that could freeze someone in time, and a space trap that could lock one into a pocket dimension. She was right. If this wasn't to capture someone, then what else could it be? But who? The blacksmith mumbled. Who would they want to capture in case Spacia managed to put down a foot on Earth? Seth had an itchy feeling, and when he looked up, almost everyone in the room stared at him. Me, he exclaimed, perplexed. But why? I mean, I know I'm quite handsome and maybe I'm a little talented in singing and forging, but, Seth joked a little, but he was serious. He doubted his skills warranted this kind of expenditure. Maybe someone leaked your skill. Finn exclaimed, glaring at the room shiftily as if she expected someone to jump up as if they were exposed by her words. Safe to say, that didn't happen. Or they conjectured it themselves, Eidolon threw in. Spacia isn't stupid. Whatever you want to say about their system, it does bring the capable people to the top. Minasmar had clashed with Spacia twice now. And Mike was even captured and stripped of his items before. Maybe they concluded that Seth needed to have some sort of ability to refine legendary materials, based on reports and Mike's equipment, the old mage mused. To think one of the secrets of his success had been revealed to the enemy was a scary thought, but it ultimately could explain why they would aim to capture him. It had not even been an hour, since he thought of them as a free license to print money. Well, for the empires it was the same. Someone who could pump out legendary materials would lead to the creation of a system that could fuel their armies with legendary items, no different from what Seth was doing right now, but on a much larger scale. Not to mention the exponential growth their blacksmiths could experience. This means we have to be careful of Krina, too, the blacksmith concluded with a sigh. It only slowly began to sink in how lucky he had been, with the music choice he made. The Song of Puppos the Diseased was able to manipulate the decisions and actions of the opponent, to subtly lead to one's own victory. Had he not used that, Seth doubted he could have resisted these items. Locked space maybe, but time dilation? He had no effects or skills that could protect him against that kind of stuff. But the blacksmith decided not to dwell on it. He was here and that was all that mattered. We should look into how to use this. Our blacksmith was so great even the great empires wanted to kidnap him, Link suggested jokingly, lightening the mood. Making the best of the current situation was not a bad idea, but there was something else Seth was more interested in. Before we keep going on tangents, can anyone appraise this one? He raised the ledger of administration. When Lena saw the book, her eyes began to sparkle. As a competent princess, she had a high-level appraisal skill that was not tied to any crafting skill. Seth also noticed others like Al and Eidolon react, but it was Lena who spoke up. It's called Sokolov's Ledger. Chapter 1238. Your turn, Ferdinand. The description says that it allows the user to see all the statistics of the territory they administer to see in detail. As well as functions to contact subordinates, she explained in awe. Her words had Seth raise an eyebrow and take a look into the book. The blacksmith had treated it like an item that worked by just equipping it. At no point did he consider looking into the book. As the tower master, he was technically in an administrative role, although he didn't do any of the work associated with that. It was just a short glance before he quickly closed it again. The pages were filled with columns and rows of quickly changing numbers. The header of the page he had looked at mentioned TS1 and in brackets behind it little sigma. Okay, I believe you. Here, Mary, this should go to you, Seth said outright. As the head of administration and the chosen of Hestia, this was obviously an item that fit Mary perfectly. He realized that he had simply decided to give it to her this time and awkwardly looked around the room, but nobody seemed to disagree. Mary was the best candidate for the ledger of administration. With this, all the important loot from the battle was distributed. The blacksmith clapped his hands. I would say it's time to unseal the ballroom now and celebrate our victory. Seth gave Lena and Mary a glance to see whether they still wanted to bring up anything in the big circle. The princess shook her head, but Mary made an expression as if she remembered something. Actually, since we are distributing items, we should not forget the items looted from the captured legends. The head of administration brought up the items Seth had yet to see or hear about. Mary asked one of her people on standby to go and get them, so they could decide their owners here and now. Although most were already looking forward to Seth ending the meeting and celebrating, everyone sat up when they heard that there were more items. Not everyone was lucky enough to get something earlier, so they were looking forward to another chance. Several people brought in items placed on trays filled with items Seth had yet to see for himself. The 4 legends they had captured were Vermeer, a lycanthrope, Jarvan, a human, Demis, a bishop of the Church of Kuvdite and the legend that came along with Nadina, Saushuk. The items brought in were everything taken from their bodies. Most of the items brought in were a mix of relics and epic items. It seemed that not even legends were as laden with legendary items, as Nadina was. The legendary ones in the collection were a mace, a pair of eccentric claws, a sword, an awl, a shirt, leather pants, boots, a reinforced robe, an amulet and a ring. Alzalsar, who was still on the rostrum, went back to her seat, after giving the items a quick glance. None of them seemed to catch her attention, which was why the sorceress sat back down with an uncaring expression, to watch the incoming discussion. Seth on the other hand was intrigued. Not by the weapons or armor, but by the ancient bone awl that laid among them. It was similar in nature to the horn used for the harbinger of winter woes. Its description said that it was the divine object of a forgotten god of tailoring. Let's start with this one since I believe the recipient is obvious, Seth announced with a smirk and picked up the awl. The legendary tailoring implement has the power to pierce through any hide, move to the wielder's end, similar to Sivri and Cerberus, mirror the user's skill level in tailoring. Apart from that, there were smaller improvements to dexterity and agility, but these were the main powers. Seth could see why it was abused as a weapon based on the first 2 effects. He had heard from you that it was actually quite powerful when misused as a weapon. It was a great addition to Nico Boo's. Not only could it quicken his crafting speed, as it could work parallel to him, but it also improved his fighting power in general. Any opposition? He asked after suggesting to give it to Booz. Are you sure it's okay for me to take this? The master tailor asked a little shy. He was the first crafter of Minas Mar to receive a legendary tool. Even Seth's Karen's obol had yet to grow to the legendary realm. Of course. Come and take it, the blacksmith encouraged him. Could Seth have used it, too? Yeah, but for the tower master sewing was only a supplementary. In the long run, he gained more by improving Nico's crafting speed. After the tailor took possession of his new awl, Seth picked up the pair of black claws. Jarvan's death claws, a pair of eccentric claw weapons that reminded Seth of a not further specified superhero. The legendary effect of the pair of claws was called Jarvan's Cutter. It had 3 effects. The 2 supplementary effects were doubling damage and 50% defense penetration. However, its main effect was allowing the claws to cut the void. Interestingly enough, this had various connotations like cut anything, which meant it could also cut incorporeal things like ghosts, magic, and of course the void. Cutting magic could allow the user to negate spells, and it meant being able to cause damage to things that would normally take no damage from physical attacks. Cutting the void sounded similar to cutting space, as it came with attack projection and short distance teleport through void gashes, slashed by the claws. Quite intriguing but very skill-based usages. Apart from the legendary effect, these were the work of skillful a master blacksmith and had been a relic before becoming legendary. In addition to the basic attribute improvements, the right claw had a 15% life drain and the left had a 15% mana drain effect. Great weapons overall. Need. Claim. Here, me, the slime rancher Ellen Culpepper was excitedly raising up her hand. The short woman had actually climbed on her chair, to reach higher with her hand. Seth looked at her and thought for a moment. Ellen was primarily a slime rancher, which meant she bred slimes most of the time. In a fight she would summon slimes of various affinities and abilities to her aid, fighting mostly in numbers. However, unlike a tamer, she was not helpless in a melee, as she combined the fighting skills of a slime rancher, her secondary class of brawler, allowing her to use various enhanced melee attacks in battle. So far she had not used any weapon. As for items, she already owned a legendary ring, as well as the boots and defense suit of the brawler, which they had looted from Spacia after the Battle of Y City. Since she already owned 3 items, he would have given someone else priority, but it seemed that nobody had an interest in the exotic weapon. If nobody else is going to speak up, Seth paused for a moment and looked at Felton, but the instructor shook his head. Then come up and get your new weapon, Ellie, he called her forth to claim the prize. Ellie skipped on the way to the front, hyped for the new weapon. She also skipped back the same way after receiving it. I guess this one also has a clear owner already, Seth exclaimed, lifting up the massive staff called the Mace of Demis. Similar to staffs that could be used for melee combat Seth had created in the past, this was technically the reverse. This was a long, double-handed mace that could also act as a magic staff for clerics. Its legendary effect, Humility of Demis, doubled the power of large-scale aerial priest skills specifically, while increasing blunt weapon damage by 3 times. Apart from that, the item improved healing effects by 50% and the power of holy magic by 100%. Ferdinand, come forward and get your new weapon, he called out the priest. He had asked for priority on the next healer item, so this was his, no questions asked. With a slightly embarrassed, but happy, smile, Ferdinand came to the front to finally get his second legendary item. Chapter 1239 Pair of Boots. Thank you, with this I hope I can finally keep up with those crazies, the healer said, a small tear at the corner of his eyes. Was Team 3 that reckless? Seth couldn't imagine the pressure Ferdinand may have felt at that party, without any item that actually significantly boosted his own power to save them, but it seemed like he didn't have an easy time. Seth would have also given him the Robe of Cuvdite, the other item that probably came from Demis, but that was impossible. The robe required the wearer to be at least a bishop in the Church of Cuvdite, making it useless to them. Except, since nobody among us can actually use it, I would put this on the pile to deconstruct later on. All right, he asked the room and everyone agreed. Seth would try to take apart the Robe of Cuvdite later on and see if he was able to gain an effect from it. The robe joined the same pile of shame as the set of the necrotic ruler, where it would wait until the blacksmith finally had a chance to give it some attention. Putting the blessed item away, he continued with the distribution. Oh, my! This one could turn into a brawl, Seth thought to himself when he looked at the pair of boots that was up next. These are called Jarvan's whirlwind boots. They allow the user to create whirlwinds under their feet for semi-aerial battle and charges. They also grant the skill Whirlwind Attack. Seth announced their main effect. Seth couldn't quite guess what the original effects were, but he guessed that it was probably something along the line of spirit imbuement the elven blacksmiths could use. A wind skill that allowed quicker charges or stepping in the air for a limited number of times. Whatever it was, it had actually turned into a similar effect to the soaring immortal enchantment he had leached from the sword of Elder Gak. Replicating that one and putting it on an item was actually quite costly on his power of existence, so he had not experimented with it so far. But now there was a pair of boots with a similar effect and even a skill, although that was not too impressive. The whirlwind attack created a tornado around the user that could deal between 10 to 15% of the user's main damage, meaning as physical or magical damage depending on the user. It was a simple, yet well-crafted pair of leather boots. Apart from the legendary effect, the boots were on the standard of an epic item, something along the line of what Nico Booz would have made a year ago as a craftsman-tier-tailor. As expected, a mass of hands shot in the air, simply because legendary boots were still something rare in Minas Mar, especially ones that allowed three-dimensional combat. Almost everyone in the position of a damage dealer had raised their hand. Seth saw the need to lower the number. You do know, that if you take these boots now, you aren't getting new ones anytime soon. Al brought dragon materials with her and I would start processing those in time, the blacksmith threw out there and hands quickly started going down again. Especially the lords like Monique or Jonah, who had priority for new legendary items, lost interest in the whirlwind boots. This left Bart, the chosen of Crius, Isabella, the thief of Ortega's team, and Beeman still raising their hands. At first, Morgana had also raised her hands, but she lowered it after sharing a glance with Isabella. Before Seth could say anything, the people still holding their hands up had come to a silent agreement as Bart and Beeman lowered their hands, leaving the boots to Isabella. That was quick. Well, I guess these go to Isabella. Come get your boots, he called up the desert warrior who had already received the scimitar of unhealing wounds. Once she returned to her seat, he brought up the amulet called Jarvan's heirloom. The amulet was a rough, crimson crystal. It was only polished on the front and back. The front was engraved with a foreign, slightly worn-away emblem. It roughly looked like a decorated shield, with some kind of creature in the center. Its legendary effect is called Blood Wrath, which stacks with the number of successful attacks, increasing your attack speed and granting up to 15% life steal, while lowering your defense at a similar rate, he explained after mentioning its improvements to strength and endurance. The blood garnet it was made of also granted the Garnet Guard effect, which raised the resistance to mental effects by 50%. It wasn't bad as an accessory for a warrior. Once again, several hands were raised trying to claim it. Ultimate Duhu, the Tijat, claimed it as the effects meshed well with his axe of Polytechnus. The only items left on the table now, were the trousers, jacket, ring, and sword of Saushuk, the legend Alzalsar had defeated. There was a single-edged sword, a ring, and a reinforced leather jacket. The sword of the Veil, the ring of the Illusion Master, and Saushuk's Mirage jacket. Al, was this guy specialized in mixing illusions in his swordsmanship or something? The blacksmith asked, looking at the items. Although they were not set, they fit together perfectly. The sword of the Veil had the effect of the oblique slash, which could hide the intentions of the wielder completely, showing opponents a completely different image of their attack. It was a powerful tool in the hands of someone specialized in deceiving their opponent. The ring of the Illusion Master didn't just improve a skill, but outright granted someone 3 tiers in illusion magic. Even someone without the skill would directly start off with the skill level of a journeyman in illusion magic. Lastly, Saushuk's Mirage jacket specifically allowed the user to create clones of themselves, that not only had 50% of the user's power but also shared their skills and the power of their items. In Saushuk's case, that meant his clones also had illusion magic and the oblique slash. I guess we know who this fits the best, Seth finished after explaining the effects of the items. As expected, all eyes were on Misto, who was actually trying to hide his face when he noticed all the attention he suddenly got. Everyone was in agreement. Do you want them, Misto? The blacksmith asked the demon to make sure. The mist demon nodded silently and stood up to receive them. He didn't even wait until later and equipped the items before getting to his seat. Although he only said a quiet thanks, it was clear that he was happy. With this, everything important should have found a proper owner. The remaining items will be put in the guild vault in case someone needs any. Those who got an item today may want to look into these at your own time to see if there are any other items that fit your new gear. Seth glanced at Mary and Lena to make sure there really wasn't anything else before he continued. Then the assembly is hereby finally dismissed. Everyone should go and get ready for the party. We will meet at the ballroom. Chapter 1240 Mom is a man. Gazing into the tainted dragon core, Tatel could feel his instinct drawing him to it. It was no conscious knowledge that had him ask Seth for the core, but an instinct that came from his very blood and potential. The Imuji knew that he needed the core, but not what he was supposed to do with it. He was sure this was the way to break past the level cap he hissed after helping to kill Dyro Mold. Winding his body around the dark yellow core the size of a boulder, he mused how it would enable him to break down the wall in his way. Spending a whole night, staring at the core and exploring its power with magic had left the small quasi-dragon tired. For some reason, the core felt really warm and comfortable. Suddenly, Tatel had a hard time keeping his eyes open as the realm of dreams called for him. Mom said he would call him when the party started. There was nothing wrong with a small nap until then, right? There was no need to resist a good sleep, not when it felt so comfy. His eyes finally fell shut and Tatel found himself soaring in the skies. He could feel the mighty wind blow under his wings, as he traversed the skies as if he owned them. The refreshing cool when he charged through mountains of clouds and the warm touch of the sun when he rose above them. The landscape of clouds kissed by the god of sunlight was as breathtaking as ever. Flying several loops, just for the fun of it, he dove back below the clouds where he gazed at the world that belonged just to him. Laid out like a game board, he knew every nook and cranny of it. Fresh spring belonged to him, he was its uncontested ruler. This was how it had been for millennia. Ages started flashing through his memory. He defended against dragons, demons, and other monsters. At some point, a core worm claimed the seas from him, but he didn't mind. At this point he felt old and it was good to share the load of protecting the world. At this point, Tatel felt like reminiscing the past, looking back at a good live until humans appeared in his world. The little apes were not problem at first. They seemed to blend in, but soon they started multiplying like vermin and disrupted everything. Still, it was also part of nature, was what he thought at the time. A deep rage began boiling from deep in his stomach, he could feel it like magma, making its way to the surface. He should have killed these backstabbing maggots when he still had the power to do so. He should have nipped the problem at the undeserving, disgusting creatures. Hatred clouded his mind as pain filled his body. He was no longer soaring in the sky, feeling the freedom of the wind, but he was tied to the ground, his body weak and before him, they stood. The traitorous humans. He had protected this world and them in extension, yet they betrayed him the moment he showed weakness. But they would not gain anything from this. Never. He would only leave them a curse, and a curse that would ruin their whole bloodline. Tatel had already realized that this wasn't him, but that he was seeing the memories of the original Kalsmir from an ego perspective. But now, he finally left the ego perspective. Before him towered the massive ancient dragon Kalsmir, a being so old, it was literally a dragon that managed to experience the weakness of his own old age. "I'm actually a female, young one," the dragon spoke with a soft and calm voice. It stood in such stark contrast to the hatred and anger he just shared with Kalsmir, that he couldn't process what she said for a moment. "Sex makes no big difference to true dragons," she spoke as if she read his thoughts as she lay down before him. The Imuji had no idea what was going on. Was this part of finding the solution to grow stronger? "Era? You don't even know what you are doing here, right now?" Kalsmir chuckled amused. "A true talent indeed, despite not being an actual dragon. You are currently trying to absorb my core. We are supposed to have an epic battle of wills right now, as you are trying to wrestle away what is left of my being," she explained freely. "I'm supposed to fight you." Tatel looked up at the giant dragon several hundred times his size. He was just a small guy. Even with all his magic, how was a wee lad like him supposed to slay this huge lady dragon? Kalsmir grinned, exposing the rows of massive teeth. "Right, I could wrestle away the control of your body in a wink," she said sinisterly. "But that is something for the petty and lower ranks. I lived my life, even if I died with regrets. I also have to thank you and your people that you stopped that monkey from randomly desecrating my corpse and abusing it as a battle puppet." "What a hateful little wench," she spoke, reminiscing her time as a bone dragon. "So what now?" Tatel asked carefully. Kalsmir lowered her head, bringing her eyes to the height of Tatel. The Imuji could see his reflection in the giant eyes as if they were a mirror. "What else? I actually took a liking to you. I never had a hatchling of my own, so I'm giving you my power freely if you accept me as your mom," the ancient dragon suggested friendly, her big, golden focusing on the small dragon snake. "I already have a mom," Tatel blurted without thinking. "Two in fact. One is a powerful blacksmith and the other a goddess," he suddenly bragged about his heritage. "I can't have a third mom, that would be weird." The golden eyes widened in surprise and curiosity when the little quasi-dragon blurted some incoherent arguments to refuse her offer. The gears in her mind turned, trying to deal with the logic of a weird child. Then I will be your dad. It's not weird to have a dad, right? The female dragon suddenly applied for the vacant role in the family. Tatel looked at her bamboozled. He had never thought about who his dad was, and now, suddenly, she appeared before him in a dream. Okay, Dad. The Mug accepted the adoption without a second thought. It was always good to have more family. He remembered that Mom once mentioned that there was nothing stronger than family. So having more family just meant being even stronger. That was only logical. Ding! Title: Child of Kalsmere gained. You have accepted Kalsmere, the ancient dragon, as your father. You have gained the trait, Dragon Essence. Good, now you can start absorbing the core and slowly incorporating my power into your body. However, the ancient dragon hesitated a little, as she observed Tatel closer after she became his father. Your body won't be able to handle all of it at once, in the state it currently is, she revealed her worries to him. What do you mean? I'm really strong, you know. Tatel argued. Although he wasn't as strong as Python, or Puffles, or Alzalsar, or Ceres, or the riding golems, or Evie. Although he wasn't the strongest in Minasmar, he was still pretty powerful. I know that you have great strength, but you are still no dragon. Your current body will not be able to carry the weight of this legacy. We will need to strengthen your body with the physical essence of a dragon before you can inherit my true essence. Oh, I know. Are my remains still in the vicinity? Yes. Tatel answered, a little unsure where this question was going. Great. You should wake up and consume them before you come back here. Kalsmere suggested happily. Tatel stared at her, crestfallen. His father wanted him to eat his father's bones. But those bones belonged to Mom. Mom wanted to make great things out of the bones. Tatel couldn't just eat those. They were also cursed and looked disgusting. Medicine isn't supposed to taste good. I will help you with the curse. As for your mom, didn't she allow you to take my core? I'm sure she won't mind if you take a few to make sure you stay healthy, right? The female dragon, after blatantly reading his mind. Mom is a man. Just wake up and eat my bones, you brat, the ancient dragon bellowed and kicked him out of the dream. Tatel woke up in the valley, coiled around the core. Thoughtfully, he looked at the hill of bones, left of the skeleton dragon. They were darkened by the curse, exuding an evil aura. It didn't look tasty or healthy at all, but would Mom really not mind if he ate some?